Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network and presented in partnership with TrekCore.com. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on September 30th, 2022, and is current through the Star Trek Lower Decks episode, Hear All, Trust Nothing, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a regular news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 5 television shows in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me, and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone, and my guest this week is returning guest and co-host of the Infinite Diversity podcast. It's Thad. Hey, Thad, welcome back to WeeklyTrek.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad to be back. It's been a little while since I've been on WeeklyTrek, so I'm happy to be here.
All right, Thad, well, you know the drill. I want to know something that's got you excited about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
All right, well, Alex, you know that I'm a big Star Trek fan, obviously.
Yes.
And you are also aware that I am a big Lego fan.
Yes.
So something that I've very much enjoyed this year has been some of the releases from the German company Blue Bricks, which are Lego compatible building sets. So the pieces are the same size and whatnot of Legos. And they have the license for Star Trek. So they've made the Enterprise D, and recently they came out with a Runabout, Deep Space Nine, and Klingon Bird of Prey, and they're all awesome. I have them. They're great. They've had quite a few others. They have a huge lineup of
sets,
it's a big
line.
Quite impressive.
Yeah.
But they very recently announced some new ones, including the Delta Flyer, which is near and dear to my heart, Voyager, and the Defiant, all of which I'm very excited for. And they just released pictures today of the Delta Flyer model, and like their runabout that they did last month, the Delta Flyer has the interior. You can pull off the roof and you can see inside with the joysticks and the seats and the engines, and it looks amazing, and I'm very excited. I will be ordering it on day one.
Yes, it's so funny. When the runabout was announced, you and I were DMing on Twitter, and you said something to the effect of, oh, if they ever announce the Delta Flyer, I think I would simply explode. And so here we are, and you are in pieces all over your living room. I bought the runabout. I haven't built it yet, but I think it looks great, and I think this Delta Flyer looks great too. I mean, just really, really cool. And then the idea of having both of them sitting next to each other, also very, very cool. Yeah, I mean, these guys are pumping out the sets. They must be selling fairly well. They announced
I hope so.
At Destination Star Trek Germany last weekend, because the pictures have started to kind of trickle out of the new things they announced, including the Delta Flyer. So yeah, they must be doing fairly well for themselves.
Probably the best news out of Destination Star Trek Germany, which
I think it was the only news out of Destination Star Trek Germany, other than the fact that there won't be another Destination Star Trek Germany. In addition to there not being another Destination Star Trek London, it does sound like that is it for the official UK and German Star Trek conventions.
Based on what I've heard from friends who were at Destination Star Trek Germany, more of the same would not have been welcome anyway.
Yeah. Maybe that's no bad thing, was the message I got back from some of the people who were there. Yeah, I love this. I'm really excited for this. I hope they continue to explore all kinds of new and fun Star Trek sets that they could do. I'd love it. I don't know if the Type 6 shuttle has been out of stock for a while. That also has the interior in addition to the Galileo, but I don't know if they sort of scale relatively well with the Runabout and the Delta Flyer. If not, they should make a bigger one of those that has a more detailed interior that you can add alongside it, because that'd be fun too.
The Type 6 and the Runabout, I think, are about the same scale. They have the same, they're both built to, now this is using a Lego term, minifigure scale. Meaning that they're about the same size.
Got it.
What they would be if a Lego minifigure were a human.
Oh, well, that is exciting then. You get a little line of all the ships lined up.
Right. And you can tell, because inside they have like the regular seats that a minifigure can actually sit in. Now, I'm not sure. I think the Delta Flyer might be a little bigger than scale, because based on those pictures, the seats in there are a little bigger. So I'm not sure on that one. That one may not be quite to scale with the other two.
But hey, close enough works for me.
Either way, it's still going to look awesome.
Yeah, oh, for sure. All right, let me tell you what I'm feeling good about Star Trek this week. which we're staying in the merchandise realm because, you know, you and me, we're big merch heads. So we're going to stay in the merchandise realm. And we actually don't have a merchandise story. I got fan hate on it. I don't have a merchandise story this week, which is unusual. But so we're doing all the merch stuff up front. So if you're not normally a fan of the merch stories, this is your cue to skip ahead to the actual news stories. I got in most of the first wave of Playmates figures last week.
I'm so jealous.
I had ordered them through Big Bad Toy Store and they had not arrived. And I went on Amazon and they were all except Admiral Kirk were in stock, and they were actually much cheaper than they were on Big Bad Toy Store. I think Big Bad Toy Store, it was like $17.99. On Amazon, they were selling them all for $12.99. So I was like, screw it. I ordered 2 sets from Big Bad Toy Store because I was going to open one and keep one in the box. And so I canceled one of the sets from Big Bad Toy Store and I ordered them all from Amazon, and they just arrived. As I say, Kurt didn't, because I think he's a little bit on back order. So I guess I'll get him in the next couple of weeks. But I got them all in and I'm actually pretty happy with them in the end. I was a bit afraid of what they were going to look like when they came in. Obviously, I've seen all the pictures online, and some of them, you know, if you look at close-up pictures of the figure, you're just a bit like, I don't know about that, right? Like, I still don't love the data sculpt very much. But I actually like the Discovery ones more than I did seeing them in like hyper close focused close up. I like the Spock a little bit more than I did. I'm not a huge fan of the Spock if you look at it under a microscope. But that's a big difference with these between looking at pictures of them which are like taken really close,
larger than the figures actually are.
Yeah, larger than the figures actually are, versus having the figures themselves in your hand and sort of looking at them that way, which is the way that you're supposed to look at them. And actually, at the 5-inch scale in my hand, they look better than I was anticipating. And so I'm really excited about that. I haven't taken them out of the box yet. I'm going to, but somebody sent me a picture. They had put the Picard, the Data, and the Riker into the Playmates bridge playset, the one from the early 90s. And actually, they scale really well with the bridge playset. Obviously, they don't scale well with the old figures. The old figures at 4.5 inches, it is noticeable the difference in height. I saw someone post a picture that was like, here's some of the old ones, and then here's the new one. And you're like, oh yeah, you can't, it's not like a squint and you miss it thing. It's like, it's definitely taller. But I actually thought, based off of the picture, I'll be curious to see if this, I agree once I put them in my bridge playset, which is right behind me. I actually thought the 5-inch 2022 version scaled a little better with the set as a whole, and they certainly sat better in the chairs than the early 1990s versions of the figures did. So I really hope they do end up filling out the rest of the TNG bridge crew at the very least, so I can stock the rest of the bridge there behind me with those figures. But yeah, I'm really pleased with this. I'm looking forward to them announcing more, hopefully only now in the next few months. They said Wave 2 would be announced in early 2023, and I would say if you're on the fence on these and you have seen them online and you're just a little bit like, I don't know about that, pick whichever one you think's your favorite. Let's say your top 3 favorites. We want them to make more of them. Pick your top 3 favorites, buy 2 of them, and keep one in the box, and you know, open one and play with it, and you'll have a great time.
So, Alex, as you were talking about how you had gone to Amazon and bought them all.
Yes.
Because your pre-orders hadn't come.
Yes. Did you do the same?
I literally just did that, and they are coming on Monday, and I am very excited, and I will be canceling my order through Empire Earth, or Entertainment Earth, I mean.
And like, they were cheap. Was it still like $12.99 on Amazon too?
Yeah, for some reason, Riker and Khan were $15, but everybody else was $12.99.
Yeah, and like, that's a great price for an action figure, actually, right? Like, you know, you compare like Marvel Legends and Star Wars Black Series these days are nearly $30. So to get a 5-inch action figure, fairly high quality with accessories, and have it only be $12.99 through Amazon, hey, that's no bad thing. We can't complain about that, can we? All right, well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
Well, Deep Space Nine fans were blessed this week with their first true return to the station by the Bajoran wormhole since the show went off the air in 1999, with the 6th episode of Star Trek Lower Decks' 3rd season, Hear All, Trust Nothing. During the episode, the Cerritos is assigned to travel to Deep Space Nine to open trade negotiations with the Karama. Hijinks ensue, Quark's get-rich-quick scheme fails, and a good time is had by Hall. And special guests Nana Visitor and Armin Shimmerman return to voice Kira and Quark, respectively. And speaking to Entertainment Earth, Lower Decks creator Mike McMahan talked about how this special episode of Lower Decks came together. I think it took until season 3 for me to build up the courage to go up to such a hot show and hit on it. You know what I mean? McMahan said. That first season was me proving that the theory was real. We could do an animated comedy that was funny and original, but still felt like Star Trek. Then we're making the second season before season 1 aired, so I didn't know if it worked for anybody yet. I've said this before, if we have legacy characters come back, or if we go to a legacy location, you have to treat it like you're going to Yosemite where you can enjoy being there. McMahan talked in the interview about how he really wanted Kira and Quark to be the returning legacy characters, and recalled that to recreate the correct affectation on his voice for Quark, Armin Shimmerman volunteered to bring a set of his old Ferengi teeth to the recording so he could record his lines while wearing them. As for Nana Visitor, she had this to say about returning to play Kira, quote, "There have been questions about Kira. There have been people who have told me what the character means to them and how she shifted them. I've explored that question for myself, how she shifted me. It's never really left me. Just simply stepping into her virtual uniform wasn't really that much distance for me to travel." And asked to theorize about why there hasn't been more Deep Space Nine content in the other current Star Trek shows, Mike McMahan had a number of reflections. "I haven't met a single person involved in this current era who doesn't love Deep Space Nine," McMahan said. "It doesn't necessarily speak to the characters and shows that we're all currently telling. We're not all fighting over who's going to do Deep Space Nine, but it's not because there's any aversion to it. I think it's because you want it to be the right thing. In the middle of making season 1 of Lower Decks, I remember the documentary came out, What We Left Behind. The last thing I want to do is pretend that I can take the reins from any of the folks who were making Deep Space Nine back then and take it in a direction that they were going. That's their story to tell in a way." Thad, did you enjoy this week's Hear All, Trust Nothing?
Oh, I freaking loved it. Yeah, it was amazing. It was great to come back to DS9 so many years later, and I thought they did it perfectly well. The cameos were done great. I absolutely love that Armin Shimmerman both wore the teeth and that he had the teeth to wear
right.
to play Quark. And of course he needed it because he wouldn't sound like Quark without those teeth. He would sound like Armin Shimmerman. And I just really loved it. If you want to hear more than me just saying I really loved it, although I will also say that, you can listen to Infinite Diversity, which you will also be on.
Yes, we will get the chance to talk about this twice.
So yeah, no, I thought it was amazing. I thought it was extremely well done. Very clearly a love letter to DS9, which is exactly what I wanted as someone who has been a huge fan of Deep Space Nine since it aired.
Yeah, I love this. And obviously, yes, let's hold talking about the episode itself for Infinite Diversity so we don't have the same conversation again twice. But from a production side of things, which I think is safe territory for Weekly Trek, yeah, I love that Armin Shimmerman still had a set of his teeth that Michael Westmore made for him for Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I mean, I guess if you wanted to take a memento home, I mean, he had to wear those damn things every day for 7 years that they were shooting that show and that he was filming, with the exception of the few days he was doing Far Beyond the Stars. But I imagine you probably would grow attached to them in some way, shape, or form. And hey, you know, who else is worthy of wearing your teeth than you, since they're, you know, since they would have been molded just for him. And it's funny, now that he has said that, you can definitely hear it in sort of the Quark performance, that he's wearing the teeth at the same time. And it really does make a big impact on the enjoyment of it. And I think, you know, what was your reaction to his comments about how Deep Space Nine maybe has been a bit neglected by the current Star Trek shows? You know, that sort of point about it's nothing personal, but I think in some ways we're maybe all a bit afraid to pick it up and run with it.
I mean, yes, to some extent, but I mean, I've seen a lot of people actually on the internet, on Twitter especially, that are complaining that Deep Space Nine doesn't get a lot of love, and I don't think that's necessarily true.
Yeah.
Lower Decks has referenced DS9 a lot. Picard has referenced DS9. Prodigy has also referenced DS9. They had Odo on an episode.
Yep.
I mean, perhaps not referenced as much, obviously, because like Prodigy is basically a sequel to Voyager. Picard is basically a sequel to TNG. So, I mean, we have more references to those, obviously, but I would say the show that no one's mentioning is Enterprise.
I know. Where's the Enterprise love? We got it in the Kelvin timeline, but never after. Ridiculous.
Now, I mean, there's references. Obviously, Lower Decks has referenced it quite a few times.
Yeah.
And Discovery has referenced it. Discovery also has referenced DS9. We have Trill in Discovery. I mean, yeah, I don't really know that I would say that DS9 has been completely neglected, but I absolutely love that we get to see the actual DS9 and our characters from DS9 on that set in those places. It was just fantastic.
Yeah, and I can definitely see the argument that Deep Space Nine, more than Next Generation more than Voyager, even really more than Enterprise, since there were sort of two distinctly different creative teams for that show, that Deep Space Nine could be tied back to a single creative team that was more or less responsible for shepherding it through from birth through to the end of the show. And in the same way, it's like, would you ever rush to pick up telling a Game of Thrones without George R.R. Martin's involvement? It feels like it's the one Star Trek show where it's like, would you ever rush to kind of pick up a defined kind of individual or group of individuals' creative works where they had an idea of where they wanted to go and then run it potentially in a completely different direction? It does feel a little bit more like you would perhaps be a bit more creatively reluctant to do something like that because Ira Stephen Bear, Ronald Moore, Robert Hewitt Wolf, some of these other kind of big names in the sort of Deep Space Nine writers' room are so intrinsically, and their creative vision is so intrinsically tied to the show in a way that, say, you can't kind of point to that person necessarily for Next Generation or Voyager. I mean, you can point to big personalities, right? Jerry Taylor, Michael Piller, Brannon Braga, but you're not necessarily going to point to any one individual and say, Next Generation is the way that it is through its whole 7-season run because of this guy right here, in the way that you can for Ira Stephen Bear.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the solution to that is we need to give Ira Stephen Bear and Ronald D. Moore a new Star Trek show.
You know, Thad, I like the way you think, buddy. That sounds like a good solution to me. It makes everybody happy, assuming, of course, that Ira Stephen Bear and Ronald Moore want another Star Trek show.
There is that.
Well, and as Star Trek Lower Decks passes the halfway point for Season 3 and starts to set its sights on its third season finale, Trek Movie at Star Trek Day had a number of questions for series creator Mike McMahan about where he wanted the show to go next. Giving an update on Season 4, McMahan said, quote, "In Season 4, the writing is pretty much done. We're seeing animatics come in, which is the black and white version of the episodes before they're animated, and it's awesome. We're recording the actors. They're getting to see how the season arcs are going. It's really cool." And as for the prospect of more Lower Decks after Season 4, McMahan said, quote, "I would like to hope I don't have any hints whatsoever. We are fully in on 4, and we're focusing on making that the best season possible. If it were up to me, I'd pick us up for 100 episodes, and we would just keep going forever. But you just have to keep your fingers crossed and hope we get to make more Lower Decks." And how long could Lower Decks last? Well, quote, "I think for me, there's a part of me that's like, I could go forever. I can make movies. I could explore how the show changes and always keep the thematic Lower Decks-ishness to it. But at the same time, if we had to have 7 or 8 perfect seasons, I can imagine that too." McMahon also talked about how the writers' room responds to fan feedback, quote, "The most important thing is that people are actually watching it and they're liking it, and they're engaging in the characters as much as we like them," McMahon said. "When we're writing a season, it's before you guys have seen the season before, and we're already fans of our own show. So we're deciding paths to go down, and it's often just sort of an interesting metric for us to be like, oh, we did something that these folks are going to love, or wow, we went in a different direction people don't expect, but I think they're going to love it anyway." Thad, obviously, we want more Lower Decks, right? We'll take that as read. We want seasons 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, however long Mike McMahon wants to make it. As you think about the future of the show, and now we've got 3 seasons under our belt, what do you think you would like to see more of? Do you have a sense of where you would like Lower Decks to go in the future?
I mean, I think generally I'd like more of basically the same that we've gotten this season. I feel like the show has really hit its stride this season. I love the first and second season, but I think this season has hit the nice balance between comedy and storytelling, and I would love to see more of that.
Yeah, I'm enjoying this season very much. I thought the 3rd and 4th episode were not my favorite, but 1 was really good, 2 was really good, 5 was really good, 6 was really good, and, you know, it's funny. I sort of sense that I think the show has reached the point where it has started to realize that the characters need to undergo some growth and movement at this stage, because we've done 6 episodes with Boimler, Mariner, Tendi, and Rutherford, still more or less in the same way we found them in the first episode. There's been some growth for each of those characters, but we've now kind of spent enough time with each of them as who they are that I think the show can kind of confidently start to evolve them and sort of begin to chart their course from the lowest of the Lower Deckers up a little bit, right? And they have kind of, you know, sort of given us a bit of the sense of that direction of Tendi started training for senior science officer, and Boimler, you know, this sort of bold Boimler thing that he picked up in episode 2, which has sort of carried through the episode so far, which is obviously a very funny joke, but also is like part of him maturing as a person and learning to be more confident as a Starfleet officer. And, you know, Rutherford and you know, exploring some of his backstory, and Tendi, you know, becoming more comfortable with herself and with her Orion heritage, as seen in this week's episode, and Mariner sort of, you know, kind of distilling down some of those sort of roguish elements to find what works about them and what's positive about her, you know, sort of devil-may-care attitude, and maybe reining in some of the more negative parts of her personality. And I think I sort of hope that in seasons 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, we continue to see this really kind of nice arc of growth for the characters, so that what I would really like is when you watch the series finale, the very last episode of Lower Decks, it's not The Simpsons, right? It's not seeing Bart and Maggie and Homer and Marge looking exactly the same they were, with exactly the same personalities that they had in, well, I guess with The Simpsons, let's call it season 2, episode 1. But I would like for you to watch the first episode and watch the last episode, and in just the same way that you do for Deep Space Nine, you see Captain Sisko at the beginning of Emissary and at the end of What You Leave Behind as two extremely different people that have been on a really evolved journey. And I want that for the Lower Deckers as well. And I think that's the direction they're moving in, and I hope they get as much time as possible to tell it. But to me, that's maybe what season 3 is telling me about what the future holds.
Yeah, okay. I agree with everything you said, and I think we've already seen a decent amount of character growth with the characters. And I would also like to see them expand, and I would also like them to do strange things, experimental things, interesting things. Some of my favorite Star Trek, when I always go back to just put on an episode of Star Trek, I find myself very often turning on TNG season 7 because I watched it as a kid and I liked how weird it got.
Yep.
And that's the sort of thing. Do the experiment, branch out, especially in animation. You can do whatever you want. You can do really weird stories and you can do strange experiments. Like, we're going to get that crossover with Strange New Worlds. That's going to be fun.
Yep.
And I want to see more stuff like that, because they can basically let their artistic vision fly free and do whatever weird and cool things they want to do.
Okay, you got to tell me now that you say that you frequently revisit TNG season 7. What is the weirdest episode of TNG season 7 that you would say you have seen an abnormally large number of times?
Oh, that's easy. One of my biggest comfort episodes of Star Trek, which is bizarre, I know, is Genesis. Right. I watch that all the time. I freaking love that episode.
Very, very cool. Yeah, that probably, if you'd asked me to guess which of the episodes you would say, that probably would be the one I would go to.
But I also love Emergence as well.
Oh yeah, New Vortiform City. Well, our thoughts and prayers go out to the family of Louise Fletcher tonight, who played Kai Wynn in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, after the news broke last week that she had passed away in her home in France at the age of 88. Fletcher, who had a long career in television and movies, was most known to Star Trek fans as the evil Kai, whose lust for power made her the villain you love to hate from her first appearance in the season 1 finale, The Hands of the Prophets, all the way through the series finale, What You Leave Behind. Deep Space Nine showrunner Iris Saban-Bear sent this tribute out over Twitter. Quote, "Every fan of Star Trek Deep Space Nine should be in mourning tonight. Louise was a key player for us, a stone-cold pro who committed totally to her character. I would have loved to interview her for our documentary, but we never could sync schedules. She was so damn good, being so damn bad." Thad, what were some of your favorite moments for Louise Fletcher's performance as Kai Wynn?
My favorite moment for Louise Fletcher is, I think it's Strange Bedfellows, the scene where she realizes that she's in too deep with the Pa Wraiths, and goes to Kira for help and is this close to redeeming herself, and then realizes that it would mean stepping down and losing power and doesn't do it.
Yes.
That is just, it is the quintessential Kai Wynn behavior in that episode.
Yeah, that is a great episode and a great scene, because you're like, oh my God, she's going to do it, right? This is the redemption arc. It starts here. She's hit rock bottom and now wants to kind of buy back, you know, like the love and respect of the people and put her life on a good path. And then it's like, okay, in order to do that, you have to give up power. And she's like, no, I don't want to do that. And then just decides to go even deeper.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the one I've been thinking about a lot is Life Support, the episode where Bareil dies, and she like manipulates everybody to sort of keep him alive so that he can continue negotiations with the Cardassians because she can't do it, and basically, causes him to be in this horrible state, and is the one like pushing for them to kind of constantly keep him alive and do more of the, sort of replace his brain with the positronic whatever to, kind of like keep him as a robot person. And it's just so like, again, it's just so viciously villainous and evil, but like so selfish, right? It's all motivated by her own wants and desires, and same as every single episode she appears in. And I hate Kai Wynn.
Oh yeah,
I hate that character so much, like to the point that I don't necessarily like, there are villains you love, you enjoy watching, and then there are villains who are so bad you actually kind of hate watching them. And Louise Fletcher's performance as Kai Wynn was so good that I kind of don't like watching Kai Wynn stuff because it's just so awful. But she was so good in that role.
Yeah, I think there is no character in Star Trek that I hate more and gives me such a visceral reaction of hatred when they're on the screen as Kai Wynn.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's just like, it just grips around my heart and says, this is so awful. Stop watching this. I mean, she's done that in every performance where she played a villain.
Oh, yeah.
She's so good. She's been so good in everything that I've seen her in. Well, and lastly this week, I shudder to return to a Star Trek 4 story so quickly, but I think we need to make note of this. Paramount has removed Star Trek 4 from the release schedule entirely. Previously announced in February this year as having a December 2023 theatrical release date, the movie is now basically completely gone from the release schedule. This follows the news last month that announced director Matt Shakman has departed the project in favor of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's Fantastic Four. So there you have it once again. Star Trek 4 is back in complete limbo while we wait for a major motion picture studio that has made 13 previous Star Trek films to learn how to make another one. Thad, we were talking beforehand. So many of my previous guests who've been on more than one episode have done a Star Trek 4 story. I think you've never had the mispleasure of doing a Star Trek 4 story with me until now. So tell me your thoughts on Star Trek 4.
It's never going to happen. So I think, and you've talked about this before, it was highly unlikely this movie was going to get off the ground, even from when, if we're ignoring all the other times Star Trek 4 was announced, this time, this one that was announced in February, when they announced it, they didn't have any of the cast signed on. We haven't heard anything about it since then I don't think anyone actually thought this was going to happen next year. So I was not surprised at all that they just removed it from the list. I do not think we're going to get another Kelvin movie. I would love to, but I just don't think it's ever going to happen.
Yeah, to me, they just don't seem to want it enough. And by them, I don't mean the cast, I mean the studio. Just because, let's just go back to the J.J. Abrams quote from February, which was clearly just designed to get investors hyped up about the possibility of a new Star Trek movie. They had not put any real thought into it or made serious moves towards actually getting a Star Trek movie off the ground. And that's how you end up with J.J. Abrams saying, "We are thrilled to say we are hard at work on a new Star Trek film that will be shooting by the end of the year, that will be featuring our original cast and some new characters that I think are going to be really fun and exciting and help take Star Trek into areas that it has never gone to before," or something like that, right? What a load of codswallop, right? They stepped on that story immediately because the first thing anybody did who was in their right mind in the entertainment journalism world was went to Chris Pine, Carl Urban, Zachary Quinto, Zoe Saldana, and said, "Hey, J.J. Abrams says a new Star Trek movie is going to be filming by the end of this year. When are you going in front of the camera?" And they go, "Honestly, we just learned about this. You're telling me this for the first time. I've never heard this before right now," right? Which goes to show how completely unserious Paramount were about doing this. And now the consequence is the movie's pulled from the release schedule and there's no sign of anything coming anytime soon. Thank you very much. That's the end of the story. And I guess now we're at least waiting another 2-3 years for another Star Trek movie. I am making a pledge tonight on WeeklyTrek that this is the very last Star Trek 4 news story, the very last one, until they have announced a director. The cast have said they're all coming back. The filming date has been announced and the filming has started, or at least It is a sure thing that it is happening. I'm not doing another one of these stories until that happens. Even they can announce anything they want to, but until I am sure it's a sure thing, I'm not talking about Star Trek 4 anymore on this podcast. Thad, you get the last word on Star Trek 4.
We already have a Star Trek 4, and it's awesome. You can watch it. It's in 4K now. You can watch the whales. It's great.
Here. All right. Well, we've talked about the facts, and now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So each week, my guest and I give you a wish or theory we're nurturing about any of the shows or the future of the franchise. So Thad, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
Okay, well, it's semi-related to the Star Trek 4 news. Okay.
All right.
They're not going to do another Kelvin movie, but Paramount obviously knows Star Trek is a cash cow. I mean, we've got so many shows on at the same time now. They know that Star Trek makes money. We're going to get more Star Trek movies. I don't think we're going to get Kelvin movies. We're going to get movies that, similar to how we had back in the 90s, we're going to get movies that sort of tie into what's on the smaller screen, I think.
Yep.
And I'm going to replace Star Trek 4 with something else that's probably not going to happen. But you know what? They still haven't said it's not going to happen. We're going to get the Section 31 show as a movie.
Okay. You know, it's funny. I was listening to... What was I listening? I was listening to All the Asians on Star Trek, the podcast, which, if you've not heard of it before, I think the title's fairly self-explanatory. And the host, whose name I'm forgetting, was talking to Catherine Lin, who was a writer on Lower Decks. She wrote Wage Douche, is now a writer on Strange New Worlds. She wrote the Lower Decks crossover episode, and I think she also has an episode credit for a season 1 as well. She talked in that interview about how she had worked on another Star Trek show that she couldn't talk about.
Ooh.
And it sounded very much to me like she had worked on that show before she worked on Strange New Worlds. And so I think it was Section 31.
Okay.
They didn't say anything about it, but just like the timeline, it was like she worked on Lower Decks, then she went to work on this secret show, then she went to work on Strange New Worlds, which makes me think that there can't be a show that has not yet been announced, which is moving ahead, because why would you have jumped ship from the show in development to go do Strange New Worlds? Wouldn't you have just stayed with the show in development all the way through to whenever the announcement was? Which makes me think if it was a show in development, that means that there came a point at which they were like, this is not in development anymore. You all need to move on to other things. As we know, all of the previous announced and affiliated creators with Section 31, most of them have moved not just on from Section 31, but have moved on to other projects outside of Star Trek entirely, right?
Yeah.
Bo-Yeon Kim, Erica Lippold, they were initially announced as being the showrunners for Section 31, gone off doing something completely different for nothing Star Trek related, haven't done anything Star Trek related since Discovery Season 3. All of which, to come back to your theory about Star Trek 4, there is a bunch of Section 31 creative material out there. I guess I had heard somebody say, I cannot remember who it was, and this is just me kind of rumor spreading, but screw it, we're in the part of the episode where we rumor spread, so that's what we're going to do. I had heard somebody who I was like, you sound like a fairly credible person, so I'm going to now take what you said and repeat it on air for my listeners too, had said that at a certain point, Paramount Plus, it had come down to a decision between greenlighting Section 31 or Strange New Worlds, and they chose Strange New Worlds. Correct choice, in my opinion.
Absolutely the correct choice.
But there's still a bunch of work that was done into a concept from Michelle Yeoh's Section 31 show, and maybe some of that could be repurposed over into a movie, right? A la, Star Trek Phase 2 scripts that became episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation and other shows, right? Like, if the work's been done, it shouldn't be all that difficult to kind of repurpose it into something interesting. And yeah, Michelle Yeoh's so busy and has signed up for so many projects, I doubt you're going to get her for a full TV show. But maybe you could get her to commit 4 months for a movie shoot or something like that. So that'd be cool.
And she's a big name. She's the person that would...
She's a movie star.
If you're going to do a Star Trek movie that is not a direct, continuation of one of the shows, something like that, where you're bringing in Michelle Yeoh as your headliner, she has headlined movies, so that would absolutely work. That would bring in people who wanted to see it.
Right. She is a movie star, and so put her on the movies. Yeah, absolutely. Nope, I'm a fan of that theory. Yeah, I think, who knows what they're going to do. I would like them to do a Star Trek movie. I think, there's cool things you can do in the movies. And I said this on Twitter this week when people were, I was sort of saying that Paramount was a bit of a joke for the way they treated Star Trek 4, which is not news to any of my listeners that I feel that way. And somebody said, well, why do you want a Star Trek movie? Given that the TV shows are serving up cinematic quality stuff. And honestly, it is because, for me, movies still have a cultural cachet attached to them that a streaming television show, unless it breaks through in a way that maybe one a year ever does, is just never going to. And so, maybe you're not going to get a massively different experience on the big screen today than you are from watching an episode of Stranger Worlds or Discovery or Picard or any of the live action Star Trek shows. But it breaks through into the public consciousness, a Star Trek movie, in a way that a Paramount Plus show is never going to. And I still think that matters, and I still think that's important. And I think as long as you can put together a half-decent Star Trek movie, which seems to be the thing that Paramount is really struggling to figure out how to do, if you can put together a half-decent Star Trek movie, you have created an entree for people who are willing to pay $12 to go to the cinema to see a movie. Actually, I guess that's matinee prices these days, but are willing to pay $18 to go to a movie for 2 hours of Star Trek content, who are not yet ready to commit to nearly 900 other hours, but who, by virtue of watching that 2 hours, might then commit to the 900 hours and boost the fan base and give it new life. I just think there needs to be a Star Trek movie, not because of the experience that Star Trek fans will have by watching a Star Trek movie, because of the experience that non-Star Trek fans will have watching a Star Trek movie. To me, that is why it's important. And that is why, to me, it is nothing but an endless parade of frustrations, the way they have treated it to be so goddamn difficult to launch a new Star Trek movie, the 14th movie, when they've done this so many times before in all different kinds of circumstances and scenarios. And honestly, at a certain point, just take it away from J.J. Abrams. He doesn't care enough to do this properly. Anyway, I'm soapboxing now. Take over, Thad. What do you think?
No, I'm with you on that. I think, and as a good exemplifier of what you were saying there, I know so many people in this fandom whose entry point to the fandom was the Kelvin films.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So, yeah, no, absolutely. New movies will bring in more people and get people interested in these shows that they're also spending a lot of money on, and get people to subscribe to Paramount Plus. It's ridiculous that Paramount isn't pushing out Star Trek movies.
Yeah, so Paramount, get your act together, because Weekly Trek's not going to cover a new movie until you actually have a new movie being made. All right. My theory this week is actually a listener submission. Always love getting listener submissions for wishes and theories. And I've got one this week from Nathan Hansen, who is at Nate Knight, Natenite on Twitter. And Nathan's theory is about Brent Spiner's role in Star Trek Picard Season 3. And it was a new idea that I hadn't heard before, so I thought it was worth sharing on the show. And I think the very next episode that comes out will be the post-New York Comic-Con episode. And I think at New York Comic-Con, we will find out who Brent Spiner is playing in Star Trek Picard Season 3. So this is the last chance. So there's a theory for you, but here's the last chance we've got to speculate on who he's going to play. Is he playing another Soong? Is he playing a Soong-type android? Or, in Nathan's theory, is he basically playing Data's personality and consciousness, which is the computer for like the Titan A or something like that, right? A way to bring back Data without Brent Spiner having to put any gold makeup on his face, right? Obviously, Major's gone and very dearly departed, and we miss her and wish that she could continue to be the voice of the computer, but she's not going to be. And so, I mean, unless they can figure out the phonics thing, which Roddenberry said at STLV this year that there were some issues because she didn't record literally all of the phonics. They did like 85% of what they needed to do, but they didn't get the last 15% before she passed. But anyway, that could be a really interesting way of doing it. I mean, it's maybe a little similar to Annabelle Wallace's Zora on Star Trek Discovery, that you have this sort of personality that lives within the computer that is the computer too. But that would be a cool way to bring Brent back, it would be a cool way to bring something of Data back, right? Like, I don't think that's going to be a full kind of resurrection for Data's personality and consciousness. In the first season finale, they clearly like tried to put that to bed. But like, if there was some role for Brent in that capacity, he wouldn't have to wear any makeup. He would just have to record some lines and could serve that kind of role in season 3 of Picard. Thad, what do you think about that theory?
I like that theory. It fits into, I think Terry Matalas said that he would be playing an old new character.
Yeah.
So I think if that fits that bill, I like this idea. I mean, I don't see how it is any less or more likely than anything else.
Yeah, right.
I think it's certainly possible. My only thought on that is it doesn't tie into the sound clip we got of Brent Spiner from that teaser this past spring.
Oh, yes, because he had that kind of old voice, didn't he?
Yes, and he was like making some sort of like impassioned statement.
That's right, yeah.
Doesn't seem like something that a computer would do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's not what he's doing. And it could also be that Brent Spiner is playing more than one character. He's done it before.
Do you have a theory or a wish for Discovery, Picard, Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, or Prodigy that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek or email them to me at weeklytrek@thetricordertransmissions.com, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Thad Haight, for joining me today. Thad, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
Best place to find me is on Twitter. I'm at Tyrannicus. That's Tyranicus, and I'm always happy to talk Star Trek. You can also hear me every week that there's new Star Trek on Infinite Diversity over on the BQN Podcast Network, talking about each and every new episode of Star Trek.
And you can find this show on Twitter at Weekly Trek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Thad. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.